Hi guys, this is Connie, back for more Connie Reads The River. We're on chapter 17. I think we only have like 6 more chapters to go. Their luck held. Where the river left the lake, it cut a deeper channel in the soft bottom. It took Brian half an hour to move the raft down the side of the lake, pulling it along by hand, and where the river exited, he moved to the left shore and stopped for a moment. One last thought. He could still go back. It would be easy to take the raft back around the lake, and possible, though certainly not easy, to drag Derek back up to the shelter. Once they were on the river, with the current, he would not be able to work back. But he hesitated only a moment. Any choosing was already finished, and he shook his head. It was done. He climbed onto the back of the raft, kneeling at Derek's feet as he had before, and used the pole to push it away from the bank and out into the current. The river was 60 or 70 feet across, leaving the lake, and the current at the side seemed a bit slower. It caught the raft and pulled the nose around, so it aimed downstream, but along the edge, bouncing against the bank and sliding beneath overhang willows and brush. Brian used the pole. The bottom was 4 or 5 feet down, and pushed the raft sideways out into the center. It hesitated, seemed to hold for a moment as if trying to find the current. Then the moving water caught the logs and the raft started to move. Inside of 30 feet it was matching the current, or close to it, and Brian watched the bank sliding past as the raft moved silently down the river. "We're on the way," he said to Derek. "It's working and we're on the way." For 100 yards, the river moved straight, then curved hard to the left around a small hill, where Brian quickly found that a log raft is not the same as a boat. The current was not fast, as he had guessed earlier. It was about the speed of a person walking, but it was steady and strong. The logs were heavy, and once they were moving in a direction, they were hard to turn. As a matter of fact, Brian thought, watching the bank at the end of the curve come at him, they were impossible to turn. The river curved left, and the raft went straight, cut across the curve, and jammed into the bank. The jar of the sudden stop, even moving slowly, rocked the raft, and Derek rolled against the lashings and almost fell in. Brian leaped forward on the raft, fell on Derek, and held him while the raft lurched, slid sideways, and settled against the bank, where it struck in the dirt, and brush. No. It struck in the dirt and brush on the edge of the river. 100 yards, and they were stopped. Brian slid off the raft, waist deep in the water, pushed it sideways back out into the current, climbed back on, and sat for half a minute while the river curved back around to the right and the raft jammed into the left bank. Another 50 yards. 150 yards, and they were stuck twice. Brian swore. "I'm going to have to improve this, or it will be a month on this river." He worked the raft into the middle again, and it started to move. This time, as they came into a shallow curve and the raft started to move straight, he waited until the raft was close to the shore and used the pole to jam it to the bottom and fend off. He still shot wide on the turn, but they didn't jam into the bank, and by the 5th curve, he had found a way to use the crude paddle to steer the raft. He would come in close to the shore on the inside of a curve. Then as soon as the raft was around it, he paddled the stern over and aimed it down the center of the river and fought it to keep it in the middle. They still did not always stay in the center of the best moving current, but as the afternoon wore on, Brian found that by frantically paddling through each curve, he kept the raft moving almost at the speed of the current and away from any brush or snags on the sides of the river. It worked, but the river curved almost constantly, moving through small swamps and beneath overhang trees so thick it seemed to be a jungle, and he was constantly fighting the raft. Inside of 3 hours, he felt his back and arms aching, and knew if he didn't stop to rest a bit now and then, he would never be able to make it. He decided to stop every hour for 10 minutes. Derek had told him once that that was what the military did on long marches, a 10-minute break every hour, and by the end of the 4th hour he was more than ready for it. As it happened, the break came when the river straightened out, so he didn't lose any time. The raft kept sliding as he leaned back and rested his arms and back. He used his hands to cup water into his face, rubbing the back of his neck. The evening sun was still hot when it hit him as they came out of the patches of shade made by the trees on the bank, and the cool water on his neck refreshed him. "Let's see how we're doing." He opened the briefcase and took out the map. The river was accurately drawn, or seemed to be, and as near as he could figure it, they had come about 8 miles. Not as good as he thought. 8 miles in 4 hours, 2 miles an hour. That meant 50 hours. 2 full days on top of the day they just used making the decision and getting ready to go. 4 days without water for Derek. He looked at the unconscious form and saw that the sun had burned his neck where the skin was exposed. Well, if Derek couldn't drink, Brian still could keep him cool. That might help. He took his t-shirt off and soaked it in the water. Brian used it as a cloth to wipe Derek's face and neck with cool water during his break. This ordeal was amazing to him, and he wondered at how it could be. Things happened so fast, changed so fast. Derek had been, no, he thought, Derek was still one of those people who seemed so alive. He was eager to learn, happy, bright. He seemed indestructible. Even now, lying on his side on the raft in the evening light, his chest rising and falling as he breathed, he looked like he could wake up at any second. Cut down, that's how Brian thought of him. He had read a history of the Civil War, and the author had written about the men being cut down by fire. That's how Derek looked to Brian now. Cut down. How could that be? Here he was, no different really, had been in the same place at the same time, and he was all right, and Derek was cut down. He wiped Derek's face several times. All this time the raft had kept moving, and when his break was over, he saw that they were coming into another bend. He put the t-shirt back on, wet, and picked up the paddle and started to work, swinging the stern of the raft, keeping it in the middle of the current. It would be dark in an hour or so, but he thought that it wouldn't matter. His hands were raw from the rough wood of the paddle, and he thought that it wouldn't matter either. All that mattered now was to keep moving. And that's the end of chapter 17. Be careful with that and enjoy, please and thank you, and I will see you for the next installment. Have a great one.